Hi, everyone. Welcome back to A Very Queer Book Club. Today, I'm super excited to be sitting down with my friend Eytan, a librarian, to chat about Surrender Your Sons, Banned Book Week, and a lot of other really exciting things. So if you've not purchased your copy of Surrender Your Sons, you can still do so by following the link in the description below to purchase that from Main Street Books in North Carolina. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Eytan. Well, hi, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well, and yourself?
You know, we're doing the thing. We're here. We're talking about Surrender Your Sons. I'm super excited. First off, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, hi, my name is Eytan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a gay Jewish librarian who's also a black belt in martial arts.
That is incredible. And as a librarian, will you tell us a little bit about the typical day? I mean, obviously, I'd like to know a little bit. A typical day in the life of a librarian in February.
Yeah, I was thinking we just got to rewind a few months.
Right, like in February, what was the typical day in the life of a librarian?
Back then, a lot of it would be signing patrons up for programming, helping patrons, especially then, tax. If we're talking February, that means tax season, because a lot of libraries offer free tax services, so signing patrons up for that. But it's still more or less the same right now, just done differently. All of our programs are being done virtually. Back then and even now, I'm still helping patrons to find movies or books, video games, CDs, audiobooks, and all that. Helping patrons with technology, because there's different apps they can use, and that was very important when the library was closed. Access those apps. But even before, some patrons just didn't know about them. And when I say apps, I mean Overdrive and Libby and Hoopla. Those are the three big ones. Helping them get set up with it, because it's a process, and just showing them how to use them and enjoy them.
Amazing. Well, and then what kind of drew you originally to librarianship? What was kind of some draws to that?
So I got my bachelor's in linguistics in college and didn't really do much with that. And after I graduated, I spent 2 months in Israel, and I was studying at a yeshiva, like a Jewish school, as well as doing an internship at the Association of Americans and Canadians in Israel, specifically in their library for the visually impaired. So they send large print books and books on, actually books on tape, to people all over Israel. So I was interning there, picking up deliveries and sending things out, and also organizing their collection, and sometimes making my own packages to send out based on readers' preferences. That was my first taste of working in a library. And then a couple years later, I was working as a college aide at a community college library. And that was basically circulation desk stuff, checking things out to students, returning books to their shelves and all that. And then at the same time, I also was working a retail job. So retail is a great kick in the butt to do something else. So that's what the push gave me to go back to school. And since I was already working in a library, I figured, well, I enjoy it and it's fun. I don't want to say that if you like books, you should be a librarian, because that's not what being a librarian is all about. I can talk more about that later as well. But it felt right to me. So went to grad school, and after my first year of grad school, there was a localish public library looking for a librarian, and it's either a librarian or a librarian trainee. So trainee meaning someone who's still in school. So I applied and got that. Goodbye to retail, hello to library.
And so you mentioned, that the being a librarian is not just about books. Will you mention a little bit more about what the library's role in the community? Because I know back a long time ago, it was more just focused about coming and getting books and leaving. But now I know they definitely are play a bigger role in the community. I'd love to hear more about that.
So basically, a library can be considered what's called a third place. First place is home, second place is work. A third place can be a place where people congregate, where people socialize. So that could be bars, restaurants, community centers, and that's what libraries basically are now. They're community centers. People do still come in for books and DVDs, but there's so much programming that happened inside the library. And when I say programming, it's for people of all ages. Libraries are big on children and family programming. There's teen programming, and of course there's adult programming, programming specifically for senior citizens. And there's also just all kinds of different programming, games, concerts, technology classes, those are big, cooking classes. And also keep in mind that every library is different. They deal with different budgets, they deal with different community types, so they do have to play according to those. But one of the great things about the library that I work in is that it is a very diverse community. I will say though that I also work at a college library, which is totally different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Because with college libraries, that the focus is on helping students with research.
Yeah, and so I'd love to chat now about Surrender Your Sons, because I loved it so much. What are your first initial thoughts after having read the book?
Okay, so it gave me a hangover. And I told Adam that, and he posted something on Twitter about like people's reactions to it, and like I couldn't read anything for the next few days. It was heart pounding at moments, especially those first few chapters. And then of course the ending and the epilogue. It was stressful, but in a good way.
Right. Lots of anxiety, but it was worth it.
Yeah, it was worth it because of the story it tells, and because of the ending.
Well, and are there any specific moments that really stood out to you that you really loved?
It wasn't necessarily a moment, but it was just the general camaraderie of the campers. They were there. They knew they had to do something. They were able to band together.
And it was a nice found family moment.
Yeah. His own realizations about himself and his relationships, and how important it is to recognize that not all relationships are good.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was very important. And again, it's not necessarily moments, it's just like themes throughout.
And like on that, the realization that just because you think you want something and think that's what you need, it's not what you actually need. It's not what's right for you. And what about the specific, because he does a lot of jumping and playing with time. What did you think about that?
Yeah, to me right now, that seems just somewhat standard in books nowadays. And I thought the time jumps were great. It was just a way to build on the story while progressing the story. Like he could have done like the whole thing as one linear thing, and like that just would have seemed a little bit too stale to me. So I am glad that he did those time jumps, because it added more context to what was happening in the future as we were going along.
And it kind of worked on building the tension as well. Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of Surrender Your Sons and, kind of in general, what do you think the importance of having, whether it be queer diversity or racial diversity in books on library shelves?
So, like I said, libraries are different communities. All communities are different. Some communities are more homogeneity. Like, same, some communities are very diverse. Mm-hmm. Regardless, we need diverse books everywhere, because books can be mirrors, windows, or sliding glass doors, and that's like a big thing in the library world. So when a book acts as a mirror, you're basically seeing yourself in a book. And if you look at the history of books and the characters we've seen in them, I think you'll agree that a lot of them have been, white, cisgendered, straight. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people might not necessarily relate to that. So when we get diverse books, when we see maybe not their entire selves, but a portion of themselves in them, that's why we need those diverse books. The other thing, books acting as windows, people need to be able to see how other people live, how other lives are affected. And if they can just get a glimpse, that's great. The sliding glass door, though, that's when people can actually step through and live in that. They can actually feel for those characters. It creates that chunk of empathy that we really, really need right now.
That's such a lovely metaphor, actually. That's really fantastic. And so what do you have any thoughts or advice for librarians that are maybe either trying to diversify their collections and not really knowing where to start, or maybe that are getting some pushback from, their superiors?
It's tough. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position where I do a lot of heavy collection development, but what's great is that my library is really good with diverse books. It's very challenging if you have conflict from the inside. There's this whole big thing. End of September, beginning of October is Banned Books Week. Back in April, the Office of Intellectual Freedom publishes the top 10 most challenged books of 2019, and 8 of those 10 books were LGBTQ books.
I think one of it was like George was on there.
And George has been on there, I think, since
Ever.
that's just crazy to me. And like, and Tango Makes 3.
A literal picture book about penguins.
Yeah, exactly. I can talk more about pushback from the community, because our argument is always the same. It's like, why should my tax dollars pay for books that will indoctrinate my children? Which they don't. If books were able to indoctrinate, we'd all be white, straight, and cisgendered.
What a boring world.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like that episode of Fairly Odd Parents.
Literally, yeah.
But anyway, so like, they're arguing that like, my money is going to fund this library, why should it include this stuff? That argument can easily be broken by the fact that the library serves the entire community. Gay money pays for the library. Mm-hmm. They might not realize that there are LGBTQ plus people within their own community that have just as much a right to the library as they do. That's just like the main thing that libraries and librarians have to be able to push. And whether or not the people that have an issue with the books continue to use the library or not, the library is still going to be there, and it's still going to serve everyone.
And in terms of the representation and diversity, is there anything else that you've read recently, or just in general, with representation that you really, really loved?
Definitely You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that was fantastic.
And I was talking about that one. I did that for August. That's a fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. And now it's Reese Witherspoon's first YA book of the month thing.
Which is incredible.
I know. It's amazing. The Brightlands by John Cram.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a gay thriller / horror, and it's like at an adult level, and like we're finally getting like that. Like, YA books have been becoming so diverse, but now we're starting to like get a little more diversity into new adult and adult books, which is also what we need. Speaking of diverse, I also just recently finished Priority of the Orange Tree, and that took me a while.
800 pages, right? Everyone keeps telling me to read it, and it's like 800 pages is a commitment. So I want to. It's a commitment.
It is, and you know, it doesn't have to be read in a night. I certainly didn't read it in a night. But fantastic world building, awesome action, strong female characters, and like great diverse cast. There's one other book that I read at the very beginning of this year that really struck a chord with me. It was Yes, No, Maybe So by Becky Arbatali and Aisha Saeed. Oh my gosh, it was great. It was timely. I was reading it. I was reading a digital arc of it, and I literally almost started crying at work. I was working at the community college, and let me just preface this: librarians don't get paid to read. There was like some downtime. I didn't have any students coming up for help, so I was just reading it on my tablet. And you know, Jamie is the male character. He's Jewish. Maya, she's Muslim, so like great representation just right there. But there's a scene where Jamie reads a blessing, and I can't tell you the amount of times I've said this blessing. And this particular blessing, it's for bread. You know, Jews, we say blessing before eating bread, and I've known that prayer since I was probably like 3 or 4 years old. To see that in a YA contemporary book, like.
Well, and it's like, because when I read that, on the flip side, I'm neither Jewish nor Muslim, but it's set in Sandy Springs, Georgia, where I lived for about a year. I've lived there for a while, and so I was like, okay, I lived here. I know these places they're going. I know, but so like that was my access point, and so I was able to then see these characters and be able to become a more empathetic person in that way. So I loved that book.
So like that was amazing for me.
Yeah. And I want to know, because you mentioned, that obviously all different libraries have different types of budgets when it comes to programming. But, as a librarian, if you could dream up any programming you wanted with an unlimited budget, what would you want to do?
I would just want to have authors in the library, because authors are, for the most part, authors have been incredible human beings. That some necessarily aren't. But all the authors that I've met, like at BookCon and other events, they've been so amazing, and it would just be nice, especially for YA authors, for the teens to meet them. And not only that, but like also like graphic novel artists, because graphic novels are still books.
Yes.
That's the other thing that I always argue for. So like just the chance for the readers to fully meet them, and that costs money, significant amount. But like that's really one of the big things. The other program that I would definitely argue for would be Drag Queen Story Hour.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and not just for kids though, but like for teens and adults, because it's just an all-around great program. I actually just attended a virtual one last weekend that was at a library out in Nassau County, and it was semi-bilingual. The drag queen was reading it in English and in Spanish, which is great. And the other great thing is they allow for questions, and like it's like such a great opportunity to learn. And like the most important question I was asked was like, so, and like I think it was one of the librarians who asked, and they were nervous about asking it because they wanted to ask it properly, like, well, what pronouns do you use? And the drag queen was like, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Like when I'm in character, I use she, her. When I'm not, I use he, him. And it was just like such a great learning opportunity for everyone involved. And also like, I mean, there were also kids watching and they loved it.
Well, and that's one thing I love as well. You mentioned that you were watching it at a different live in this virtual space. I know it's been weird and hard for all of us to kind of adapt to it all, but like I've been able to watch, because I was working in theater before all of this, so I've been able to watch friends shows in like San Francisco, and I've been able to go to events that my mom is a librarian in Georgia, and so she does story hour. I've been able to watch her story times, and I haven't been able to watch them for years because I live in a different state. So that's one thing I've loved, and it's created a different accessibility.
Definitely, like, and even for April or May, I was able to attend some of the Y'all West panels. I'm like, I can attend panels now. And BookCon, I went to BookCon past 2 years, and I never attended a panel because I'm like always waiting online to meet authors, try to grab an art. Like now I can actually able to watch the authors.
Do it all.
Yeah, it was actually nice, and to do it in the comfort of my home where I could like easily like grab food and coffee.
Wear your comfy pants, like.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned with the Drag Queen Story Hour, with being such an exciting learning experience. When it comes to children in the libraries reading about different people or reading about people that they might relate to when they get older, why do you think specifically that for children that's so important?
Children can be they can be very impressionable. They can, if they spend their entire lives at home with their parents or in school with other children who look and act like them, they're going to have certain thoughts about the way things should be. And it's important for them to know that there's more. There's more than what they're being taught. There's more than what they're being told. There's more than what they're seeing. And that's why I like those diverse books like And Tango Makes Three or Prince and Knight. Like not every knight needs to rescue a princess in a castle.
Yeah, well, and specifically back on Surrender Your Sons, hopefully it's in libraries at this point. If a patron were to come up to you and be like, I found this book, pitch it to me. What is your elevator pitch for Surrender Your Sons?
Well, first three words are gay YA suspense, or gay YA thriller, but heart-pounding, stressful, and so important right now. And this would go like beyond the elevator pitch, but like because of what the book deals with, people might not realize that what happens in that book, it's not fiction. That was and even still is a very real thing. And like that's why we need books like Surrender Your Sons, and we need that reminder, especially as history progresses. And God willing, there's going to be a time where those things don't exist. We need to remember that it did, because like we need to know what life was like at one point.
Well, and there's something I just caught into my brain. You mentioned the Brightlands as a career thriller, and I would love to know, is that something, because we now have this with the Brightlands, we have Caleb Rohrig, who's done a lot of thriller. Is that a space that you're excited to see more of with thrillers?
Definitely. I'm just excited in general to see more queer representation in not just coming out stories, not just fantasy stories. I want like those hard, grisly, terrifying stories, gay characters. I'm looking for those action-packed with like 20-something-year-old messy gay.
And one thing I loved is what Adam said, and I think it's in his little author's note, is that he wanted to write a book about queer resilience and healing. And
Yeah.
and do you think that he did that? I mean, do you think that's what we get?
I think so, because of the way it ends. I mean, again, it's like those teenagers, those young adults rising up against something, but they all share something in common. And I do think he succeeds. And again, I don't want to spoilers, but like that epilogue.
It hits it like a ton of bricks. It really does.
I was like almost in tears. I had to go for a walk afterwards.
Okay, so if you had to sum up how this book kind of made you feel in just a word or a sound, just, you know, summing it all up in just a brief moment, what would that be?
Like mouth open, eyes popped.
So is there any last thoughts before we thank you so much for sitting down to chat?
Thank you for having me. This has been great. I'm very excited to do this. I'm reminding myself of that scene in Matilda. You know, like when she first discovered the library and like we see her, that montage of her like walking back and forth with the wagon, and the narrator's like, she learned that she's not alone. We're not alone. We've got all these amazing authors that are giving these stories to us. It's such an amazing gift.
That was always one of my favorite moments of Matilda, which with the little wagon and just the stack. Yeah, that was such a special moment. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. Next week, I'm sitting down with a panel of readers to talk about Surrender Your Sons and the themes and messages within it. So I'm really excited about that. And until next week, have a fantastic one, and I will talk to you later.